On 20th January, Lenz crossed the mountains. Snow on the peaks and upper slopes, down into the valleys, gray stone, green patches, rocks, and pine trees. It was cold and wet. The water trickled down the rocks and leapt across the path. The boughs of the pine trees sagged in the damp air. Gray clouds marched across the sky. But everything so close. And then the mist came swirling up and drifted dank and heavy through the bushes, so leaden, so sluggish. He carried on, indifferent. The way meant nothing to him, now up, now down. He felt no tiredness, just occasional regret that he couldn't walk on his head. A surge swept through his breast at first, when the rocks seemed to leap away. The gray wood shuddered beneath him, and the mist devoured the shape of things, then half revealed their giant limbs. The surge swept through him. He sought for something, as though for lost dreams, but he found nothing. Everything was so small to him, so near, so wet. He would have liked to tuck the earth behind the stove. He couldn't understand that he needed so much time to clamber down a slope, to reach a distant point. He thought he should be able to measure out everything with a few strides. Only sometimes, when the storm cast the clouds into the valleys, and they swirled up through the trees, and the voices awoke amongst the rocks, at first like distant rumbling thunder, then arriving with a roar in mighty chords as though they wished in their wild exulting to sing the praises of the earth. And the clouds galloped up like wild whinnying horses, and the sunlight pierced them and came and drew his flashing sword along the sheets of snow so that a bright, blinding light went slicing over the peaks and down into the valleys. Or, when the storm drove the clouds downwards and tore a hole in them, a light blue lake, and then the wind fell silent, and far below a sound like lullabies and church bells rose from ravines and treetops, and a delicate red spread upward in the dark blue sky, and tiny clouds went past on silver wings, and all the mountain peaks, sharp and solid, flashed and glowed far across the land. Then his breast burst. He stood there panting, his body bent forward, his eyes and mouth wide open. He thought he should draw the storm right into himself, embrace all things within his being. He spread and lay over the entire earth. He burrowed his way into the all. It was an ecstasy that hurt. Or else he stopped and laid his head in the moss and half closed his eyes. Then everything receded far away. The earth beneath him shrank, grew small like a wandering star, and dipped into a roaring stream whose limpid depths stretched out beneath him. But these were only moments. And then he stood up, sober, solid, calm, as though a shadow play had passed before him. No memory remained. Towards evening, he reached the crest of the mountains, the snowfields that led down again to the westward plain. He sat a while at the top. It had turned calmer towards evening. The clouds lay solid and motionless in the sky, nothing so far as the eye could see but mountain peaks from which broad slopes descended. And everything so quiet, gray, increasingly faint. He felt a terrible loneliness. He was all alone, completely alone. He wanted to talk to himself, but he couldn't. He scarcely dared breathe. His footfall rang like thunder beneath him. He had to sit down. A nameless fear took hold of him in this nothing. He was in empty space. He leapt to his feet and flew down the slope. Darkness had fallen. Heaven and earth had melted into one. It was as though something were following him, as though something terrible would catch up with him, something no human can bear, as though madness were chasing him on mighty horses. At last he heard voices, saw lights. He felt a little easier. He was told it was another half hour to Waldbuck. He walked through the village. The candlelight shone through the windows. He looked in as he passed. Children at the table, old women, young girls, the faces all calm and still. It seemed to him as if they were the source of the radiant light. He was filled with ease. He was soon in the vicarage in Waldbuck. They were sitting at a table. He entered the room. His blond locks hung about his ashen face. His mouth and eyes twitched. His clothes were torn. Oberlin bade him welcome. He took him for a journeyman. "I don't know who you are, but I bid you welcome. I'm a friend of Kaufmann's, and I bring you his greetings." "Your name, if you please?" "Lenz." Yes, let me see. Are you not in print? Have I not read a few plays that bear such a name?" "Yes, but pray do not judge me by that." The conversation continued. He hunted for words and then rattled them out, but as though on the rack. Gradually, he grew calm. The homely room and the calm faces emerging from the shadows. The radiant face of a child upon which all light appeared to rest, looking up full of trust and curiosity, glancing at its mother sitting calm like an angel in the shadows at the back. He began to talk. recounted where he came from. He sketched all manner of local costumes. They thronged around him full of interest. He was soon at home, his pale child's face now full of smiles, his knack of bringing his story to life. He grew quiet. He felt as if forgotten faces, figures from long ago, were reappearing from the darkness. Old songs came to life. He was away, far away. It was finally time to go. He was led across the road. The vicarage was too small. They gave him a room in the schoolhouse. He went up. It was cold upstairs, a large room, bare, a high bed right at the back. He set his candle on the table and paced up and down. He went over the day in his mind, his journey here, the place itself, the room in the vicarage with its lights and kindly faces. It was like a shadow, a dream, and emptiness overcame him, as it had on the mountain. But he could fill it with nothing anymore. The candle had gone out. The darkness swallowed everything. A nameless terror seized him. He leapt up. He ran through the door, down the room. He ran through the room, down the stairs, in front of the house. But no use. Darkness everywhere. Nothing. He himself but a dream. Random thoughts came ghosting by. He grasped at them and held them tight. He felt as if he had to repeat "Our Father" again and again. He could find himself no longer. An obscure instinct drove him to save himself. He banged his head against the stones. He ripped his flesh with his nails. The pain began to restore his consciousness. He hurled himself in the fountain, but the water was shallow. He could only splash about. Then people came. They had heard the noise. They called to him. Oberlin came running. Lenz was himself again. The situation was clear to him in every detail. He felt easy once more. He felt ashamed and sorry to have given the good people such a fright. He told them he was accustomed to taking cold baths and went back upstairs. At last, exhausted, he fell asleep. All went well the following day, with Oberlin on horseback through the valley. Broad slopes funneling down from on high to form a narrow, winding valley that climbed and twisted far into the mountains. Great masses of rock that broadened towards the bottom. Few trees, but all of them in gray, grave coppices. A view of the distant countryside to westward, and of the chain of mountains that stretched away to north and south, and whose peaks stood like a fading dream, still and silent, massive, grave. Huge masses of light that sometimes streamed from the valleys like a river of gold. Then clouds that lay on the tallest peak and slowly slipped over the trees and down into the valley or rose and fell in the flashes of sunlight like silver gossamer. No sound, no movement, no birds, nothing but the sighing of the wind, now far, now near. Distant points became visible, too. The skeleton of huts, straw-topped planks, grave and black. The people, silent and grave as though not daring to break the peace of their valley, saluted quietly as they rode by. All was bustle in the huts. They thronged around Oberlin. He chided, counseled, consoled. Everywhere prayers, eyes full of trust. The people recounted dreams, premonitions, then straight into practical life, laying out new roads, digging ditches, visiting the school. Oberlin was tireless. Lenz his constant companion, now talking, now working, now lost in contemplation of nature. It all had a benign and calming effect on him. He would often look into Oberlin's eyes, and the mighty peace that comes over us at the sight of nature in repose, in the depths of forests, in melting moonlit summer nights, seemed even nearer to him in these calm eyes, his grave and venerable face. He was shy, but he offered observations. He spoke. Oberlin found his conversation most agreeable, and Lenz's graceful child's face filled him with joy, but he could bear it only so long as there was light in the valley. Towards evening he was seized by a peculiar fear. He would have liked to follow the sun. As objects become more and more shadowy, everything seemed to him so dreamlike, so horrible. He was filled with the same kind of fear as children asleep in the dark. He felt as though he were blind. His fear now grew. The specter of madness settled at his feet. The thought that everything existed only as his dream opened before him like a fatal chasm. He clung to objects of every kind. Figures rushed by him. He flung himself on them. They were shadows. The life drained out of him. His limbs were quite rigid. He talked, he sang, he recited Shakespeare. He seized at everything that had quickened his blood in earlier days. He tried everything, but cold. Then he had to get out into the open air. The faint light scattered across the night made him feel better as soon as his eyes were used to the dark. He leapt into the fountain. The sharp shock of the water made him feel better. He also secretly hoped to fall ill. He now bathed less noisily. But the more he adjusted to the life, the calmer he became. He helped Oberlin, drew, read the Bible. Old, long-dormant hopes reawoke in him. The New Testament seemed so real to him. And later, when Oberlin recounted how an invisible hand had held him on the bridge, how a dazzling light had blinded him in the mountains, how he had heard a voice speak to him in the night, and how God had come to him so completely that he had taken the tokens from his pocket like a child in order to know what he should do, this faith, this eternal heaven and life, this being in God, now for the first time he understood the Scriptures. The way nature came so close to these people, all in heavenly mysteries, yet not with a terrible majesty, but as something still known and familiar. One morning he went out. Snow had fallen in the night. Bright sunshine lay in the valley, but the landscape beyond half hidden in mist. He soon left the path. Up a gentle slope, no trace of footsteps now, along the edge of a pine wood, the sun-etched crystals. The snow was light and fluffy. Here and there in the snow, faint traces of animals leading into the mountains. The air quite still, save a gentle sighing, and the rustle of a bird softly shaking the snow from its tail. Everything so quiet, and the white-feathered trees in all directions swaying gently in the deep blue air. He felt steadily more at home. The awesome mass of lines and spaces that sometimes made him feel they were speaking an awesome voice directly to him were veiled from sight. A warm Christmas feeling stole over him. He thought at times that his mother would be sure to appear from behind a tree, larger than life, and tell him she had given him all this as a present. As he went back down, he saw a rainbow of radiance envelop his shadow. He felt as if something touched his forehead. The presence spoke to him. He came down. Oberlin was in the room. Lenz went up to him, all serene, and told him he would like one day to preach a sermon. "Are you a theologian?" "Yes." "Good, then. Next Sunday." Lenz went delighted to his room. He began to think about a text for his sermon. A meditative mood came over him, and his nights became peaceful. Sunday morning arrived. A thaw had set in. Drifting clouds, patches of blue. The church stood on a spur of rock a short way up the hill, the churchyard round about it. Lenz stood there as the bell rang out, and the worshippers came from every side on the narrow paths leading up and down between the rocks. The women and girls in their grave black costumes, on their prayer books the folded white handkerchief and sprig of rosemary. From time to time a splash of sunlight lay across the valley. The warm air slowly stirred, the landscape shimmered in a pool of fragrance. A distant sound of bells. It seemed as though everything were dissolving into a single harmonious wave. In the tiny churchyard, the snow was gone. Dark moss amongst the black crosses. A cluster of late roses leaning against the churchyard wall. Late flowers, too, peering from the moss. Sometimes sunlight, then shadow again. The service began. The voices of the people merged in bright, pure harmony. It was like gazing into pure, clear water from a mountain spring. The sounds of the singing died away. Lenz began to speak. He was shy. Thanks to the music, his numbness was gone. All his pain awoke and filled his heart. Sweet sensation of endless well-being crept over him. He spoke simply to the people. All shared his suffering, and it was a comfort to him if he could bring sleep to weeping, tired eyes, and peace to tortured hearts. If in the face of this existence racked by material needs, he could guide this silent suffering towards heaven. He had found more strength by the time he finished. Then the voices began to sing again. "Let in me the sacred passion, open all the deepest wells. Suffering be my sole reward, suffering be my praise to God." The surging within him, the music, the pain, threw him into turmoil. The whole universe seemed stricken by terrible wounds. It filled him with deep, indescribable pain. Then suddenly, a different being, lips divine, leaned towards him, met his own, and sucked at them in trembling fervor. He went to his solitary room. He was alone, alone! And then the wellspring roared. The tears came bursting from his eyes in torrents. His body writhed, his limbs convulsed. He felt as though he must dissolve. There seemed no end to this voluptuous bliss. At last it faded. He felt the balm of deep self-pity. He wept for himself. His head sank onto his chest. He fell asleep. The full moon stood there in the sky. His locks tumbled down over temple and face. The tears still clung to his lashes and dried on his cheeks. And so he lay there now alone, and all was calm and still and cold, and the moon shone down the whole night through and stood there over the mountains. The next morning he came down. He told Oberlin quite calmly how his mother had appeared to him during the night. She had stepped from the darkness of the churchyard wall, dressed in all white and with roses at her chest, one white, one red. Then she had sunk down in a corner, and slowly the roses had grown up around her. She was surely dead, but he felt quite calm. Oberlin then told him how, at the time of his father's death, he had been alone in the fields, and had heard a voice, and knew at once that his father was dead, and so it proved when he came back home. This led them further. Oberlin talked of the people up in the mountains, of girls divining water and metals beneath the earth, of men fighting spirits that seized them on mountaintops. He told him, too, how once in the mountains he had been put into a kind of sleepwalker's trance by gazing into the fathomless void of a mountain pool. Lenz said that the spirit of the water had come over him, and in consequence he had felt something of his essential being. He continued, the simplest, purest kind of human nature was most closely connected to elemental nature. The more refined the mental life and emotions of a person became, the more this elemental sense was blunted. It was no very elevated state in his view. It was insufficiently independent, but he thought it must give a feeling of infinite bliss to be touched by the essential life in each form of nature, to have a soul receptive to stone, metal, water, and plants, to be able, as though in a dream, to take into oneself each being within nature, as flowers take in air with the waxing and waning of the moon. He voiced more of his beliefs, how he saw in all things an indescribable harmony, a resonance, a blessedness, which in the higher forms of life had numerous means of making itself graspable, audible, apprehensible, but in consequence was all the more attenuated, whereas in the lower forms everything was necessarily more contained, more restricted, but its tranquility, in consequence, greater. He pursued this even further. Oberlin stopped him. It took him too far from his simple ways. On another occasion, Oberlin showed him color tokens. He explained the relationship of each color to mankind. He cited the 12 apostles, each of whom, he said, was represented by a color. Lenz took this in, developed it further, had anxious dreams, and began, like Stilling, to read the Apocalypse, and devoted himself to reading the Bible. At about this time, Kaufmann came to the Steintel with his fiancée. At first, Lenz found this encounter unpleasant. He had made himself such a niche. The little bit of peace was so very dear to him, and now he was faced with someone who reminded him of so much, someone he had to talk to, and who knew his history. Oberlin knew nothing of all that. He had taken him in and cared for him. He saw it as an act of God, who had chosen to send him this unhappy man, whom he dearly loved, and they all found it right and necessary for him to be there. He belonged amongst them, as if he had always been there, and no one asked where he had come from or where he was going. At table, Lenz was back in good spirits. The topic was literature. He was in his element. The idealist period was beginning at the time. Kaufmann was a keen supporter. Lenz was vehement in opposing it. Those writers, he argued, of whom it was said that they reflected reality, in fact knew nothing whatever about it. But even they were a good deal more bearable than those who sought to transfigure reality. The dear Lord, he said, has surely made the world as it is meant to be, and I doubt if we can cobble up anything better. Our one aspiration should be to create much as he did. What I demand in all things is life. Full scope for existence. Nothing else really matters. We then have no need to ask whether something is ugly or beautiful. Both are overridden by the conviction that everything created possesses life, which is the sole criterion in matters of art. All the same, we meet it only rarely. We find it in Shakespeare. It speaks to us full-throated in folk songs, fitfully in Goethe. Everything else can be thrown in the fire. These people can't even draw a dog kennel. They are supposed to want idealist figures, but they have produced nothing, to my knowledge, but wooden puppets. This idealism displays the most shameful contempt for human nature. People should try it sometime. They should enter it completely into the life of the meanest of men, and then reproduce it with every twitch of an eyebrow, every wink and nod, the whole subtle, hardly perceptible play of facial expression. He had tried something of the sort in The Tutor and The Soldiers. They are the most everyday people in the world. But the pulse of feeling is the same in almost everyone. The only difference is the thickness of the covering that it has to pass through.
All you need is the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Yesterday, as I walked up the valley, I saw two girls sitting on a stone, one putting up her hair, the other helping, and her golden hair cascading down, and a pale, grave face, and so very young, and her black peasant dress, and the other so helpful, so full of concern. Even the most intense, most beautiful paintings of the old German school give scarcely a hint of it. Sometimes one would like to be a Medusa's head, to be able to turn such a tableau to stone, and shout to everyone to come and look. They stood up. The beautiful tableau was gone forever. But as they clambered down amongst the rocks, there was yet another picture. The most beautiful images, the most resonant harmonies, coalesce, dissolve. Only one thing abides, an infinite beauty that passes from form to form, eternally changed and revealed afresh. Though needless to say, you can't always capture it and stick it in museums or put it in music, then summon all and sundry and have them prattling away, both young and old, and getting all excited. You need to love mankind to be able to reach the essential being of each individual. You must consider no one too lowly, no one too ugly. Only then can you understand them. The most ordinary of faces makes a deeper impression than any contrived sensation of beauty, and you can let the character's own being emerge quite naturally, without bringing in anything copied from outside where no life, no pulse, no muscles surge and throb. Kaufmann objected that he would find no models in reality for the Apollo Belvedere or Raphael's Madonnas. What does that matter? Lenz retorted. I have to confess that things like that leave me utterly cold. If I work at it within myself, I can doubtless generate feeling of some kind, but it takes a real effort. The writers and artists I like, above all, are those that most strongly convey the reality of nature, with the result that their work engages my feelings. Everything else troubles me. I prefer the Dutch painters to the Italians. They are the only ones, too, that you can truly grasp. I know only two paintings, both by Dutchmen, that have as much effect on me as the New Testament does. One of them, I don't know who by, is of Christ and the disciples at Emmaus. When you read how the disciples went out, the whole of nature resides in those few words. It is a somber twilight evening, a monotonous streak of red on the horizon, the road half in darkness, a stranger approaches, they talk. He breaks bread. With their simple humanity, they realize who he is, and the divine suffering in his face calls out to them, and they are afraid, for it has grown dark, and they are touched by something beyond understanding. But it is not some ghostly dread. It's like a dead beloved coming up to you in the twilight, just as they used to be. That is how the picture looks, with its all-pervading brownish tinge, its still and somber air of evening. Then, another one. A woman sits in her room, prayer book in hand. All is Sunday fresh and orderly, the clean sand scattered, so pure and warm and homely. The woman couldn't go to church, and she is saying her prayers at home. The window is open. She sits turned towards it, and it is as though the sound of the bells in the village were floating across the wide, flat landscape into her window. As though she can hear faint echoes of the hymns in the church not far away, and the woman is following the words in her prayer book. He carried on, speaking in similar vein. They listened attentively, much struck home. He was flushed from all the talking, and he shook his blonde locks, now smiling, now grave. It had taken him completely out of himself. After the meal, Kaufmann took him to one side. He had received letters from Lenz's father. Lenz was to go home and give him assistance. Kaufmann told him how he was squandering his life here, uselessly wasting it. He should set himself a goal, and so on and so on. Leave, retorted Lenz angrily. Leave this place. Go home. Go mad there. You know I can't bear it anywhere but here, in this countryside. If I couldn't get out onto a mountain occasionally and see the landscape all around, then come back home and walk through the garden and look inside through the window, I'd go mad. Mad. Leave me in peace, for God's sake. A little bit of peace, that's all, now that I'm starting to feel a bit happier. Leave this place. 3 words. That's all, and the world is ruined. I don't understand it. We all need something. What could be better than having peace? Climbing ever higher and battling onward, forever spurning what the moment offers, always fasting in order to feast in the future, choosing to go thirsty while bright streams sparkle right before you. Life is bearable now, and I want to stay here. Why? Why? Because I feel happy. That's why. What does my father want? Can he give me more? Impossible. Leave me in peace. He became very angry. Kaufmann walked out. Lenz's mood was soured.